Hi, my name is Dean Haspiel. I'm the creator of the Red Hook and Billy Dogma, and I'm going to be talking to Izzy on the IzzyVerse coming this Monday.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the IzzyVerse. We have a great show for you tonight. I have a great guest with me, and we're going to be talking a little bit about his work and everything he's done. And I had a chance to meet up with him a few times in the past in the previous shows, so we're going to have that guest in a few minutes. But before we get started, just want to go over a couple of plugs that are happening this week. Starting with Wednesday. This Wednesday is the premiere of Obi-Wan Kenobi, so we're going to be doing our preview show to discuss Obi-Wan Kenobi, but I have some really fun guests talking a little bit about what their expectations are, as well as we have a Star Wars Guild. The Empire Saviors Guild is going to be joining us for this show. So be on the lookout for that one for this Wednesday, same night that Obi-Wan comes out. And of course, it's a wrestling weekend, and this weekend we have Double or Nothing coming up. So we're going to do our prediction show this Friday. I have a couple of guests as well lined up, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the great matches that are coming up. Will CM Punk win the title this time? I'm not sure about that one, but we'll see. And I just want to make sure to let everyone know that June 11th is our show in the Bronx, and we're going to have the Bronx show happening on June 11th. It's going to happen in the Grand Slam Banquet Hall, and it's going to be a fun show. With that said, let me introduce to you guys someone that is born and raised in New York City. He is an American comic book artist, writer, playwright. He's known for creating characters like Billy Dogma, the Red Hook, and he has collaborations with writer Harvey Pecker of his American Splendor. He's also worked on numerous projects, The Alcoholic, and he's also an Emmy award-winning artist as well for design work, and he's Eisner Award-winning nominee, Ringo, you name it. With us, Dean Haspiel. How you doing, man?
Good, Izzy. Thanks for inviting me onto your show, man. I have to laugh because you said Harvey Pecker.
I know, I said it wrong. I caught that afterwards. Oh, the fun stuff, right? Live TV, right? When I realized that after I said it, is that you're trying to read this small font sometimes.
Oh boy.
But yeah, man. So you have a very long history with some major top talent, right? But before we start talking about that, I want to talk a little bit more about again, the same thing I ask everybody that watch my show, that's part of my show. It's like, how did it all begin for you?
You know, my default answer is, because this is what I remember, is picking up the Fantastic Four off the newsstand, falling in love with this comic book, and also Shazam, which is the Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel, the CC Beck character. But when DC Comics got it, they couldn't call him Captain Marvel, and I didn't know that as a kid. I just knew him as Shazam, right? But then when you're reading inside, Billy Batson becomes Captain Marvel by saying Shazam. Anyway, I love those comic books. Obviously, there was the Batman TV show. You know, I'm sure there was lunchboxes and whatnot. But at age 12 is when I decided I would dedicate my life to the creation of comic books if I could possibly turn that into a career. And about 20 some odd years ago, I'll be 55 at the end of May of this month. About 20 some odd years ago, I have been working full-time freelance as a cartoonist, which, you know, knock on wood, right?
Yeah, man, you're living the dream, right? As they say, right? You're living the dream.
It tastes like peanut butter sandwiches.
I hear you. Now, you and I do have something in common, though. Our first comic book wasn't the same comic book. Like you said, Fantastic Four. My first comic book was actually Marvel Tales. It's a Spider-Man. It was a Spider-Man team-up book with Thor, and it also included Havoc in it, but it was a reprint. Now,
I was gonna say that was a reprint series. Yeah.
yeah, that was a reprint series. I didn't know that. I was a kid. I just picked up a comic
of
book with
course.
Spider-Man, right? But the one thing that we do have in common as far as our first comic book goes is that they were both illustrated by John Byrne.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
so it was very weird looking at that comic book now, thinking about it. That Spider-Man by John Byrne that also has Thor and Havoc in it.
Mhm.
You know, because it was a issue with the Living Monolith. That was the
I was
cover.
gonna say, I know that comic very
Yeah.
well.
It was a fun comic. I still own it. It looks like garbage right now, but
Well, that's good. That's how it should look because it meant
right.
you did it. You didn't put it in plastic and hide it, and
Oh,
try to.
it's in its plastic now, but it's like destroyed. You know what I mean?
It's,
It's like
it's half the bag. It's all at the bottom. Of the
yeah,
bag, right?
it's to the point that if I was to get that book graded, they're gonna look at me like, "You serious about this?"
Right. Now that was Chris Claremont wrote that, right?
Yeah, Chris Claremont wrote it. John Byrne did the artwork. I want to say
Chris Claremont
Terry.
is like 8 blocks from me.
Oh, really?
Here
Wow.
from the studio. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say Terry Austin did the
Probably.
inks. You know, that's usually when you see John Byrne, you see Terry's inks on top of it. You know, this
Or
is
Dan
some
Green.
guy
I think
Dan Green
as well at the time. So
yeah, so it was definitely one of those books. It was a preview for you. It was a Fantastic Four, right, where John Byrne pretty much did a lot of the work.
He did a lot of that, but I think the actual issue I picked up was that I remember, or when I said when I focused and went, all right, yo, comics is my life, was probably issue number 197, and I believe it was a George Perez cover. Keith Pollard, I think, penciled it. Maybe Marv Wolfman probably wrote it, and it featured the Red Ghost.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah, look at that.
You mentioned two guys. I had to show them off, right? So we got the John Byrne and we got George Perez. Obviously, with the passing of George Perez a few weeks ago, but I will tell you this much. Though that Spider-Man was my first comic I purchased, my favorite superhero will have to be Warlock. There's something about it. Yeah, I love Warlock. I love him.
He's cool. He's very cool. I love Warlock too. I'm curious to see how they use him in the cinematic universe.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious about it, especially since everything that made Warlock cool kind of already happened in the cinematic universe. But then again, when you go back to the Jim Starlin run, before Infinity Gauntlet, he had a lot of rich history already. So I take it they'll probably go through the high evolutionary route or something like that. But when you think of Warlock, you think of Thanos, they kind of go hand in hand. It's really weird.
And isn't he him? No, that's Captain Marvel. Who am I thinking of?
He's him.
Movies, he is him, right?
Yeah, Adam Warlock's him.
That's right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they've already shown or hinted at him in Guardians of the Galaxy, I think, or one of those movies.
Yeah. So in Guardians of the Galaxy, they went backwards. They went in reverse, right? Where they showed the race, where they actually showed her, the goddess,
right,
and then she creates him. She has a hand in it. So they ended the series with the Cocoon, and of course, if you know the Cocoon,
that's right.
It's Adam Warlock. So
that's right.
There was rumor that he was supposed to be part of Volume 2, but because of the story, it would have just been too convoluted. They just decided. So they've been holding out on him for a while now. So.
Right. I read somewhere because I just saw Doctor Strange Madness Multiverse, whatever that's called, that America Chavez they've been wanting to put her into the cinematic for a while now.
Yeah, they had plans for her already too. So she was supposed to be in Spider-Man. She was gonna be in Spider-Man, but because of the whole COVID issue, they decided to flip it. So she ended up showing up in the Multiverse of Madness. I like to call it more the instead of the Multiverse of Madness, I'd like to call it the Madness of Wanda, because that's what that movie felt more like to me.
Oh, totally. I mean, I don't want to do too much spoiling, but first of all, it's absolutely like Evil Dead 4, right?
Yeah. Well, with some trinkets of Carrie and
totally
right. There's so many scenes that they just straight up took from Carrie and Firestarter.
I saw it with my studio mate Whitney Matheson, and she's already painting the tips of her fingers black.
Oh, that's right. Like with the whole finger thing, right? I forgot. Yeah,
I love that.
It's no longer the fingernails; it's the fingertips now.
It's the fingertips. It just goes up to about half. So who's sadder, Doctor Strange or Peter Parker after the last two movies?
Oh, Peter Parker, man.
Peter Parker, right?
Peter that tears your heart, but then again, it's so Peter Parker, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like for those of us who really understand the character of Peter Parker, what makes Peter Parker great is the sadness that comes along with his character, that he can never really get what he really wants.
Right.
And it's always the result of something dumb he did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part that makes it more a vulnerable character. I think that's why the character of Spider-Man has lived as long as it has, and everyone loves him because they relate to really the moves he makes as a human. He's more of a human character than anybody else.
The flaws. It's related to the flaws of his character. Like everyone has flaws and everyone makes mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
So I totally get it. Like, that was the greatest, I think, addition that Marvel Comics brought to comic books was human error, and the humanity of the characters. Because before that, they were more black and white, like heroes and villains,
Mm-hmm.
and like knights in shining armor and stuff, and evil versus good, and that can only go so far, right? And you can't relate to that as a person reading those things, and these morality tales. But then now we have this kind of modern mythology, and
Mm-hmm.
I've said it, lots of people said it. Marvel and DC superheroes is our American mythology, just like the Norse have their gods,
Mm-hmm.
the Greeks have theirs. These are our gods, but they're very human,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even with the DC characters, there's a lot of, I hate to say it, I think those that are not part of the comic book community, they don't get it sometimes, and they start thinking it's a us versus them mentality. Like either you're a Marvel guy or you're a DC guy, and then for those of us that are like really embedded in the comic community, like we are, it's not about Marvel versus DC. We love them. We love them equally, and we love them. We love them differently because we understand how they are. I think we wouldn't have Marvel if it wasn't for DC, no matter what. DC was the first. They came out before them, just like Tarzan and the things before that came before, with Zorro. And that's how we got Superman and then Batman eventually. And then we ended up getting, the whole rich DC universe.
Mm-hmm.
We had to get that first in order to get to Fantastic Four, Incredible Hulk, Spider-Man,
and to bring it around to the Fox, like Archie, early out the gate, also had their superheroes, Archie Comics, and the Fox was created in 1940 by Joe Blair and Irwin Hasen. Irwin Hasen would later on go to create other DC characters like Wildcat.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. And Wildcat's one of those characters that it's like, you probably know a guy like him.
Oh,
you know what I mean? He's the type of guy that a guy like him. You may not be that guy, but you may know that guy. Yep. Like there's definitely a Wildcat in our world somewhere that we go relate.
Well, it's funny. Some of my favorite characters are the ones who are heroic or reluctantly heroic, but they don't really have superpowers. They use their brawn and their brains, basically to get by or to tackle some kind of hassle, right? I love that. And that's what I do with the Fox. That's what I have done with the Red Hook. I mean, the Red Hook has had superpowers for a little while, but not his entire tenure, and I just think it's more interesting. It's harder for me to write and draw characters with superpowers because you can always lean on that when you need to, right? But then you have to try and find the faultiness of those powers, I mean, with Superman, it's kryptonite, right? Green Lantern is the color yellow,
Well, there was a great joke. I don't know if you ever watched Big Bang Theory, but the golden age was wood.
Right.
And the silver age moving forward was yellow, right? So the joke was, well, you could beat them up with a yellow pencil.
That's right.
So that was
and you know what, though? You're making me think, like, since they're iterations of, right, whatever this age is now, it would be cool if they found a different kind of thing that could defeat the Green Lantern or a Green Lantern. I don't know what that could possibly be.
I know
it should be absurd. It should be absurd,
Well, I know in the Rebirth story that they did, they kind of explained the whole yellow aspect. What was the deal with the yellow, right? That's they did a little explanation of why it was yellow in particular. the villain that was involved. Like, why is his name escaping me? It looks like this big giant bug character and so forth. But that was part of that yellow, and that's they kind of housed them in the lantern, and that kind of brought that in.
Oh, all right.
So yeah, it's crazy. Jeff Johns, his writing sometimes goes AWOL sometimes, but it works. It's comics, right? That's how comics works, right? It doesn't always have to make sense. It just needs to make a little bit of sense sometimes.
But you know what I enjoy? You said Jeff John. Didn't he write? Why am I blanking on the name? It's like it involved the DC heroes and the Watchmen, right?
Alan Moore?
No. Jeff Johns.
Yeah, he did a Watchmen. He did a Watchmen sequel.
What was that called? I'm blanking on it right now.
The Watchmen sequel by Jeff Johns. It's blanking on me too.
But I remember, and it was Gary Frank drew it, right?
Gary Frank did the art. Yeah,
I remember really liking that story a lot.
I liked it, and then for some reason, I think it was because of delays. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Because of major delays, it eventually kind of like I lost track of it. Right, so I never finished it.
It's great. It's great. Finish it.
Yeah, I do have plans to finish it. But I never got a chance to finish it. So
I also know that a lot of fans are like think it's sacrilege to ever touch the Watchmen, franchise. I'm like, whatever, man. You can make more stories and not like them. Whatever.
Doomsday Clock.
Doomsday Clock. That's what
there it is.
Called. It was pretty good. I enjoyed it.
Well, talking about sacrilege, watch the Watchmen TV series was perfect. It was perfect to me. It was a perfect example of taking a series that you love, and it was weird when they first mentioned it as it being a remix, but it really was a remix. It was taking the same stories and putting it with a different character, with a different tone, with a different theme, but it's all the same beats. The beats are almost exactly the same.
Well, it's funny because I felt like the story almost felt like this might have been a different TV show, and not that they shoehorned Watchmen into it, but they figured out how to make it an absolutely work as a Watchmen story. Like, was it 30 years later or something?
Yeah, it was 30 years later. So, Silk Spectre, she works for the police department. She gave up the whole crime fighting thing. The only thing that was missing from it was certain characters, like Night Owl was completely missing. But they mentioned him here and there.
Yeah,
they mentioned him here and there, but he was like completely gone. The whole Mr. Manhattan side of things I thought was brilliant how they did it. And it was like as you kept watching the show, it's like you knew the answers were there in front of you, but you didn't see it until like later in this episode.
So good.
It was written so beautifully. The Hangman story,
the very last second is a perfect ending too.
Yeah, and it. You know what? If we don't get any more, I'm fine with that.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like take it where you want to take it. How's this? 30 years from now, we'll get something else.
Sure.
Why not? Right. So I think that was a perfect example of taking something that we loved and beloved, like Watchmen, right? So because I can go back to Watchmen, I can read it over and over, and learn new things. I love reading the motion comic. I don't know if you ever read the motion comic. So the motion comic, I think, is in HBO Max. It's the comic book.
Okay.
It's the comic. There's nothing different about it, but it's a comic book with voice actors doing the scene. So the images don't really move that much. They'll move just a little bit or slightly a little bit, but it's actually a really good. It's like reading a comic book version of an audio book. That's how it feels like.
I don't. Maybe it was the motion comic, but I remember. I feel like I saw or heard Adam West, who played Batman, right? I think he did a reading of Watchmen, or maybe it was a Frank Miller Dark Knight comic. I can't remember. I think it might have been Watchmen, and he was incredible. It was so grisly and dark and eerie. He had such a great voice. To hear him perform, like really cool writing, and bring it out and make it so theatrical with his voice was amazing. And I wish I could remember what that was.
I remember he did the Gray Ghost in the Batman the Animated Series.
Oh,
which,
did? I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah. When you watch it, you'll catch it. You'll be like, oh yeah, that's him. It's obvious, and it was an homage to him anyway. So it was
awesome.
So that was really great. So we got a lot. We're talking a lot about comics, which is always great. Let's talk a little bit about your history and stuff. Where you got started, obviously. You mentioned your love for Shazam. You mentioned your love for. I had to find something with Shazam, right? This image, it always cracks me up because there's things about this image that today you look at it like, so there's some things that don't work.
Sure.
I don't have to point them out, but
I know.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
That dude in the back, right next to the other dude. Like, come on, what's going on?
But even at the same time, what is Silva doing? I don't know. There's something weird about Silva's character.
I know. It's almost like, because it's presenting as kids comics or YA or whatever, it's almost like you can tell when the creators start to get a little frustrated drawing just for kids and they have to insert their own kind of like little naughtiness, even when it's just a character design, but I mean, it's kind of weirdly, you're reminding me of that famous Wally Wood drawing illustration of Disney World. I think it came out in 1967 in some alternative newspaper. And when you look closely, everybody is like doing drugs or screwing each other. It's all the famous Walt Disney characters. And I feel like sometimes you have those kind of shackles on your hands, Like I always think about Kurt Swan or Jim Aparo. Like Kurt Swan drew so many issues of Superman, and Jim Aparo and did Batman and God bless him. But after a while, it's like, oh my God, what can I do that's just a little different, or sneak something in there or whatever.
Just do something suggestive, right? I personally, when I see that, I like that the fact that the artist is thinking at this moment. They're doing it. It's tongue in cheek, of course. It's not meant to be, have a overarching meaning or anything like that. Right. But it is something like it's as you're drawing, you're just having this little giggle and and I think I saw that in some of your work.
Oh, I definitely did something in the first panel of I think it was my War Cry comic. Yeah. There's a bunch of heroes that you only meet for like a minute and they all get obliterated, right? Mm-hmm. But there's this horse character. And he is just wearing a pink horse wearing a green cape. And he's leaned over in a certain way that if you look at the shadow between his legs, there's something hanging out there.
Yeah, I call it things like that.
Or it's not, it's not blatant. It's just there.
It's not blatant, and it's something that, again, it's like when you're observing the art, you're looking at it, and I think, when you have a certain eye for art, there's some of these things come out to you immediately, right? And then for some people they don't. Right. I'm one of those guys that again, as I mentioned to you before we started the show, growing up in church, I used to learn a lot about symbolism, and when you would see symbolism in certain, really in artwork and TV that were meant to be something else, the whole Illuminati thing that comes along with it. But at the same time, as an artist, where it becomes a tongue-in-cheek thing. Mm-hmm. But as an artist, you start pinpointing some of those things, and you start saying, was that intentional or not, or was it something else?
Or to keep it a little related, it's like Easter eggs,
Yeah, they're Easter eggs.
Easter eggs. I remember doing homework in class, and you'd write a little essay or whatever, or you try to answer these questions. You hand in the homework. The next day, you just get like a check at the top, right? Mm-hmm. And I used to think, are they really reading the homework? They see the kind of effort I put into this. So one time I wrote in the middle of an essay, like, can I curse on this?
You could do what you want to do as long as it don't go crazy. How's that?
I basically told the teacher to go fuck themselves, right? Sorry. And the next day I get the homework back with a check on it. And I'm like, you're not even looking at this.
You got the check for it?
I got the check mark.
But you know what? Now that you mentioned that, I had a high school teacher who you could tell. First of all, she was the pretty high school teacher. You know, we all have that one high school teacher like, oh my goodness, that's why I went to class for, right? So she was that kind of teacher, and she was an English teacher, and I was not the best of students. I'll just say that much. I was not I did not go to class every day. Let's just say that.
Okay.
And but I went to class today, and she gave us the typical essay. You know, the typical. What did you do? How did you spend your summer vacation?
Right.
Right. That typical essay that you have to write almost every year. And I just said like this. I said, screw it. I'm just gonna write a fictional story. And I made the decision of not do a non-fictional story essay. It really wasn't an essay. It was more of like a short story. And I wrote this short story, and it's crazy looking back at it. But I ended up making a story that me and my best friend, we ended up and we found this cave, and we went into the cave, and we found this underground Morlocks, things like that, where there's a leader, and
You got X-Men in there.
yeah, I did a little bit of X-Men. I threw some Sandman references as well. And you know, the story was supposed to be like
Omega Man.
Yeah, it was like what one of you is going to betray the other, and the other one's gonna die, right? So the story ended up with I ended up betraying my best friend to save my own life, pretty much.
Wow.
And I came back, and today I wrote the story. And when she wrote, and it was like it had to be like 8 pages, handwritten pages. We're talking about 8 pages handwritten. Of course, she wasn't expecting 8 pages. But when I handed it to her, first of all, I gave it to her kind of jokingly, like, here you go. Miss Freeman, that was her name, Miss Freeman. I gave it to her, and she didn't give it back to me with a check mark. I'll tell you that much.
She saw it as a cry for help. She was like,
it's a SOS
signal.
No, she loved it. She absolutely loved it. And she came up to me the next day when she saw me, and she was like, you know, when I usually give this assignment, I expect them to do this. I've never had a student give me something like this before. Keep up the good work. Stuff like that. And it actually encouraged me to be more of I'm not a writer per se, but I'm an artist with a writing process, right?
Well, let me speak to a couple of things you just said. First of all, do you feel that comics inspired you to write that kind of a story?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was definitely comic based.
Okay, and then let me speak to I'm not a writer. For a long time, I felt that I'm not a writer. But drawing comics where image is text, you are writing with your art.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree.
You may not feel like you might write the best dialogue or something, but you know, you probably know story a little bit by now. Like it'll end, right? Like so keep going and just trust your instincts, because you have been reading so many stories. You know, even if you're like scratching your head, where does this go, or what should I do? Just rely on the fact that there are other stories that you can borrow from. You know what I'm saying? At least the structure, or be inspired by, and think about, well, that's how they did it. This is how I might do it. You know?
Yeah, and I agree with you entirely. It's like, as you know, when I was talking about I'm not a writer per se. One of the things I'm a storyteller. I consider it more storytelling. I like storytelling, because when you tell a story, you have that complete piece, right? You got your in a playwright, you got acts and things like that. So I do like to think in that way, especially when it comes to artwork, because I'm with you on that. It's like comic book media. What's very interesting about the comic book media, and again, this is a story I hear from a lot of people, is that they learn how to read through comics, right? And chances are it wasn't the word balloons that brought them to the dance. It was the imagery that they were able to translate, and then eventually pick up the word balloons of what they meant. You know, and a lot of people start talking about what's more important in comics, the writing or the art. The art draws people in. I'm sorry to say it. The art draws people in. It's the writing that keeps people in. You know what I mean? And it's not just the writer from the writer. It's the whole team that goes with it. Not just the writer. It's the writer and the artist and the inker and the colorist and the letterer and everything else that goes along with it. Because it's one thing I love about comics is that, you know, it could be a team effort, it could be a two-person effort, but there's always a dynamic, and if it's done really well, then you have some great stuff.
And
You know
even
what I
as
mean?
an author, even when you're writing and drawing everything yourself, there are many sides to conveying a story that you're, you know, basically showing and telling, right?
Mhm.
Because a lot of it is show and tell.
Mhm.
And I agree with you. If I had to reduce, like somebody was asking me, why do you call yourself a cartoonist? And to me, I understand for a lot of people, cartoon sounds like animation. But the reason why I say cartoon is because I think it encompasses writing and drawing and other you know, parts of the assembly line to create a story, right? A comic book story. But if I'm going to list myself as cartoonist, writer, artist, playwright, filmmaker, at the end of the day, the only credit I really want is storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's because that's what we're doing ultimately with all these mediums, you know.
Yeah. Right. So you started your business at a very young age. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
But these are two particular titles that you were working hand in hand with. Can you tell me a little bit about both of them?
So American Splendor was a comic that, so early on when we're talking about the kind of comics I picked up that kind of hooked me, right? So we have Fantastic Four, we have you know, Shazam, and in the Marvel and DC comics. But then I discovered two other comics, Yummy Fur by Chester Brown, which was this oddball kind of like story with vignettes, or comic book with vignettes. It was a black and white comic, and it had Ed the Happy Clown serialized in it, and a bunch of other stuff. And the other comic I started picking up was something called American Splendor, written by Harvey Pekar with different artists. And then over the years of picking up that comic once in a while, I realized, well, maybe I could get my foot in the door in comics that way. You know, like I'm trying desperately to get into Marvel and DC. I'm not good enough. My art's a little too alternative, but maybe alternative in a good way, you know, because I started doing my own kind of little memoir comics myself, right? And so I remember sending Harvey, me and my good buddy Josh Neufeld, who I went to high school with. We did a mini comic series called KeyHole, and I would do half the comic. Josh would do the other half of the comic, and Josh eventually started to focus more on, there you go, started to focus more on kind of like nonfiction and autobio. But I would do a little bit of autobio plus create characters, superheroes. I created Billy Dogma, stuff like that. Anyway, Josh sent some of his work to Harvey Pekar and gets a gig drawing a Harvey Pekar American Splendor story, right? I'm like, Josh, I'm so much better an artist than you. I should get you know, Harvey to send me a script. For about a year or two, I kept sending Harvey my work, nothing. I heard nothing back. And I was like, damn. And I started to have like, you know, trepidations, right? And I was worried about like, what the hell am I doing? Like I can't get Marvel work necessarily. I can't get work with Harvey Pekar. Where do I belong, right? Mm-hmm. So, and of course I'm picking up 8 Ball and, you know, a bunch of other comics. So I get a phone call from a guy that sounds like Harvey Pekar. He says he's Harvey Pekar. He wants to offer me a 1-page gig. I start thinking I'm getting pranked here, like by Josh, right? Mm-hmm. Or somebody. And I'm talking to him. I keep saying, are you sure you're Harvey Pekar? He's like, yeah, man. Yeah, what are you trying to, don't you want to make some bread? Kind of a thing. I'm like, I want to make some bread. Now I totally know somebody's messing with me, right? Like no one really talks like that. I know Harvey writes like that, and then he basically, I ask him one time too many, are you sure you're Harvey Pekar? And he tells me to fuck myself, and he hangs up the phone. And I'm like, what just happened, right? Like, so I immediately called Josh, thinking maybe Josh would call me. This is before phone numbers would light up on my phone and whatnot. Yeah. You could tell who's calling, right? I said, Josh, you just call and prank me, pretend to be your Harvey Pekar? He goes, no. I said, I think Harvey Pekar called me and I pissed him off. He's like, well, tell me what he said. What happened? So I told him everything he was offering me. They don't want to make some bread. And he said, Dean, that's Harvey Pekar. That really was him. I was like, oh my God. So what am I going to do, right? So he gives me his phone number, and I call him back, and I apologize to Harvey, and he took my apology, and he said to me, "Well, what do I got to do to prove to you that I'm really Harvey Pekar?" Right? I said, "Give me that job," and he did. And
there you go.
That relationship, and I did a couple of things for American Splendor, and then eventually, I was working as an assistant to movie producer Ted Hope. At the time, the company was called Good Machine. And as an assistant, it meant that I had to do a lot of stuff like his laundry, his bills, and clean up like his house. And I remember rifling through a bunch of scripts, and there was like this old American Splendor script that somebody had written. And there was also like, I think like a Ghost World script, or I don't remember, like a couple of like alternative comic scripts. And I was like, Ted, I know Harvey. He's like, you do? I was like, yeah, man, I've been working. I did a couple of stories with him. I was like, it'd be awesome. It's like, if you talk to him directly, and because I found out more about what he was trying to do, I'll hook you up with Harvey and try to make a movie, So I gave him the number. He calls a couple of times. I don't even know if they picked up. I think Joyce actually called Ted back, because I think that Harvey would get phone calls all the time from people and just like say, I don't care, like this is not real. It was like during his David Letterman years. And I think people would just give him a call and like he would like sign an option or maybe, say yes to something and it would go nowhere. So I think that he just felt like, who's this Ted Hope guy? Anyway, eventually they got together. Ted Hope hired two great directors to like parse out this whole American Splendor kind of idea. And have you seen the movie?
No, I haven't seen the movie. I know it's Paul Giamatti.
It's fantastic. Even to this day, it's a great movie. And they did this incredible hybrid of like putting Harvey, the real Harvey, in the movie with Paul Giamatti. And then there's the comics art. There were so many different iterations, kind of like his comic book series. But it told this really cool, beautiful story about, a clerk, a hospital, clerk in Cleveland, this kind of blue collar worker. And Josh Neufeld and I actually did a really great, intensive podcast series called Scene by Scene with Josh and Dean, where we go through every scene and talk about the comics and our careers. And we have a lot of guests on this podcast. It's free. That's out there right now that people should check out. So that was, and then eventually I found out that a writer named Jonathan Bankin was becoming an editor at Vertigo. And the week before he started working in the offices, I had a lunch with him. And one of the ideas I had was about trying to do something with Harvey Pekar at Vertigo, which eventually became The Quitter, which for all intents and purposes is Harvey Pekar's origin story in comics form. So, but to jump back a little bit to 1985, because I see the American Flag comic, I was a senior in high school. I had been going to music and art. And then in my senior year, music and art in Harlem, got married to performing arts, the Fame School, became LaGuardia High School.
Yeah, I remember LaGuardia.
In 1985. And my good buddy, Larry O'Neill, Denny O'Neill's son, Denny O'Neill, the famous writer, editor. And then Larry, and I had befriended Larry in school. And he had heard that Howard Chaykin needed an assistant on American Flag. And at the time, Larry wanted to possibly do comics and he would write and draw his own stuff. So he got a gig as an assistant to Howard on Flag. And that room was called Upstart Studios. And Howard shared it with, at the time, with Walter Simonson, who was working on Thor, and Jim Sherman. Previous residents of that studio were Jim Starlin, Frank Miller, and I think Val Myrick, and maybe someone else. Down the hall was Bill Sienkiewicz, Dennis Cowan, and Michael Davis. And then Larry finds out that Bill wants an assistant, and that's how I got in there, right? Eventually, and that was a crazy year. Eventually, I was an assistant to Bill on New Mutants and Electro Assassin. I would then work with Howard Chaykin on American Flag and a little bit on Thor with Walt Simonson. And that's me, 17 going on 18.
That's nice company right there, right?
It was like, oh my God, right? And then Larry O'Neill recently, like a week ago, they announced the Eisner Award nominations, and he has been nominated for Best Short Story called Tap Tap Tap. That was in the Green Arrow 80th anniversary annual issue, and it's a tribute to his father, drawn by Jorge Fornes, and it's a beautiful story. And I'll bet it wins.
Yeah, I got to check it out. Definitely got to check it out. You know, you mentioned Denny O'Neil. Obviously, we lost Neil Adams as well. They were a big team together. They were, you know, again talking about, you know, people that go hand in hand together, right?
Yep.
O'Neil and Neil Adams. Those were two guys that, you know, when you put them together, it was gold. 9 times out of 10. I know they had the one hiccup.
Sure.
With the Wonder Woman's piece, I know with O'Neil, like, I tried, but it didn't work. I know you tried.
Yep.
Yeah, so really good company to be around. American Flag is one of these books. I have a few copies of it. It's been a long time since I read it, but it was definitely one of those ahead of its time stories.
Still ahead of its time,
right? So ahead of its time.
Yep.
You know, so
fantastic. And I talk to Howard on a regular basis, and I think because he also did a bunch of other comics, obviously, and he had another series called Times Square, and he came out with 2 of those books. In fact, I can even see that there's a Times Square on the cover of this American Flag special, and he's got the 3rd Times Square book coming out pretty soon. And of course, he's been doing Hey Kids Comics recently, The Divided States of Hysteria, which you know. It irked some people, the people who didn't read it.
Well, that's normal.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No, but that was a really incredible time. Like, I was going to this arts high school, and you would think at the time they would embrace comics, right? But they didn't really embrace comics.
They did, yeah. Even when I was in college, comics was still. Yeah, that's childish stuff, and
right. And someday I'll learn to grow up and become a real artist, right?
Yeah,
but I learned comics from working for these guys. And in fact, when I eventually went to SUNY Purchase College, because I took 2 years off after high school, I decided I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to try and become a cartoonist or whatever, and that wasn't working out. So I had been visiting my friends who were going to SUNY Purchase, and finally I was like, let me just go to SUNY Purchase. So I got in for art for about 2 years, and I didn't like it. I was like, I'm not a fine artist. I'm not a painter. I'm not a sculptor. I'm a storyteller. And they had gone for film school, right? So I decided to change majors, and I moved into film, and then everything started to make more sense because I was thinking in terms of pictures that tell story, And in fact, in about less than a week, I'm going to be going to Greenport, New York, to the Manhattan Film Institute to write and direct a couple of short films.
Oh, that's great. That's good. Yeah. When I was in college, right in the late 90s, 2000, and I had to go to college for advertising, arts, computer graphics, because that's all it was for art, right? That was it. That was the art, and a lot of it was for advertising, obviously advertising arts, right? But that was the only thing out there really for me. And like you said, it's either fine arts or it's graphic design. I didn't want to do graphic design. I don't want to do advertising. I don't want to do marketing. I don't want to do all that stuff.
Right.
I want to be at that time, especially at that time, I wanted to do comics.
And there was only one, 2 or 3 places to go to an institute like SVA, the Joe Kubert School, and that might have been it.
Yeah, and for me, Joe Kubert, I'm a kid from the Bronx. You're from Brooklyn. I'm from the Bronx. Joe Kubert's not around the corner, right?
No, yeah.
And growing up, I was a low income family, so we didn't have the money to do it. So I ended up going to Bronx Community College, and it was a great time. I met some good friends who I'm still friends with right now.
Right.
And I graduated from there, but that degree really didn't take me anywhere. It didn't take me anywhere. And it's not like I could go up to even, let's just say, a Marvel or DC and say, hey, here's my resume, because that's not how it works, right?
Right.
That's the different thing. So what I ended up doing in the 2000s was I just ended up paying for these services that will help me in my storytelling more than anything. Did I need to learn how to draw, you know what? We all could learn how to draw a little better, but it's really about the storytelling, right? One of the storytellers that I at first I didn't like his artwork, and you'll know when I tell you who it is, you'll be like, yeah, I see what you mean. I didn't like his artwork because I thought it was too boxy. It was
Mhm.
something about it that didn't do it, and to this day, it's still a little like that. But then when I finally got a chance to really look at his art, I realized that he was doing things to my eye that I didn't expect, and that's Remedia Jr.
Oh, I love Ramita Jr. He
Right?
one of the very few artists that can draw the feeling of gravity.
Yeah. So
You
as I
know?
was looking at some of his work, it wasn't even the figures that were drawing me. It was like the settings. Like he was able to do things with perspective
Yeah,
lines to make my eye go a certain direction.
yeah.
Right. And he was doing it on purpose. I realized as I was watching it, he's making me go here. He's making me go there. He's making me do things. And I didn't get it until I started reading Scott McCloud
Hmm.
and his books, Understanding Comics, is when I realized what he was doing. And then today, it's like if I see John Romita, I'm picking that sucker up because
Every time.
it's just one of those things. And it's again when I look back and I said I really didn't like his artwork at that time. It was because it's that boxy feeling. His
But
women really weren't that good either.
but you're also talking about like having an allergic reaction, right? A little bit. I
Yeah.
had the same thing with Jack Kirby, who's my favorite cartoonist.
Hmm.
Like he was just a little off, a little odd. Maybe I was introduced to his work in his latter years, and then I would go back
Hmm.
and see him at his prime, you know. And of course, he had so many phases of style in his work, and he just kept. It was almost like, and other people have said this before. It's almost like he went through a Picasso phase, you know,
Hmm.
where it became very cubist, almost, you know. But at the end of the day, you were just looking at ideas. Forget figures and the mechanics of storytelling. You're just seeing you're awash in so many different ideas and concepts that's what he was hitting you over the head with, almost a little too much at times, you
Hmm.
know. um but yeah, no, I mean John Romita Jr. And it's funny because like sometimes they take these guys who have now gotten older
Hmm.
and maybe their style isn't in vogue right now, right?
Yeah.
And then they tend to sometimes over render them in coloring. Sometimes they over ink
I
these
agree.
guys, you know, depending on the inker. And I'm not disparaging, you know, anybody who works with, you know, and collaborates because it's always a gamble, right? But some of my favorite Romita Jr. inkers is like a Klaus Janson, you know.
Hmm.
I even liked what Al Williamson did with him on Daredevil, you
Yeah.
know.
Hmm.
Someone who understands like that there's a chunkiness to this guy's art, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, and you know, and learning from Simonson, like one of the things I learned from his Thor comics was his ability to show scale. You know, you could just draw like an army in a small panel and show an ocean and horses. I'm like, what? How is he doing this? You
Hmm.
know? And there was just so many. There's so many things you learn from different artists that you like or work with. Like Howard Chaykin, I learned the power of the inset panel, that little thing that floats over between two panels, right?
Hmm.
And what that actually means, and the service of storytelling. You know, little things like that. And in a way, now we have thousands of comic book colleges and ways that, you know, tutorials, and
Hmm.
everyone and their mom can learn how to draw comics or make comics. But when we were younger, we didn't have that available to us. So really it was a calling in a lot of ways. And you found your way by doing it and making those mistakes.
Yeah, I agree. And and again, it wasn't until recently. One thing I could say, and I'm sure you could do the same thing, is like when you saw an artist, you knew who it was.
Hmm.
Today's society is kind of hard to pinpoint who's an artist.
Hmm.
Not so much that the art's beautiful. I think both Marvel and DC are producing some beautiful art. The
Right.
the problem I have with today's art, today's comics in the mainstream, is that I can't distinguish who's the artist behind it. To me, there's a few guys that I could probably say, oh, I know that guy's art style, or I know that guy's art style. Like we said, we could mention Walter Simonson. When we see Walter
Right.
Simon, you immediately know Walter Simon's style. You immediately know Frank Miller. You immediately know John Romita, Tom McFarlane, Liefeld, Jim Lee, you
Right.
name it, right? Those guys, you could pinpoint who they are just by looking at a page and you say, I know who did that.
Mhm.
Today, you don't really have that. Today, that's kind of gone in a way. I was talking to somebody, a comic book shop guy, and he had said, can you distinguish? Like, yeah, I can distinguish it. I was like, but why can't I? And I think
But
a lot of it has to do with coloring too.
It could be coloring because coloring has become so essential to a certain kind of what a former studio mate and a good pal of mine named Mike Cavallero, who's a great cartoonist, great. He started to describe the current wave of like these kinds of comics, like he called them blockbuster comics, like they were trying to be blockbuster movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're adding all this hyper detail and rendering and coloring, and the like. Back in the day, the inker was like the embellisher, right? Well, now the colorist is like the embellisher in a lot of ways, adding so much more value, right? And often they can be working with the line art, you know, or they just go in and do their magic, right? And it's incredible what this stuff looks like. I can't draw like this. I don't even want to draw like this. To me, comics had a certain look based on like what attracted me to comics when I was a kid, right? And of course, you can evolve somewhat, but I think also what you're experiencing, Izzy, is like I can't tell you who the new comic book artists are really, because I don't really buy those comics anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I buy a handful of Marvel and DC. I don't follow them like I used to, you know. So that means that there's a new, you know, recruit, a new, you know, cavalry of comic book artists, right? I don't know who these people are. I don't attach myself to them as like I used to, you know, where I could identify. And I'll bet you some of the new kids can identify these artists. It's just that you might be aging out a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, depending.
Yeah. Well, the one guy I've been following lately has been Dan Mora, who has that beautiful style. And again, he's working with Mark, who you worked with at the Fox.
Right.
He's working with Mark, and they're technically doing a Silver Age comic in World's Finest.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's awesome. The art is so sharp to me. But at the same time, it's brush strokes. That's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing the brush strokes of the work in his art. So because it's totally digital, but it's working on his favor. So you have those guys, but then like you said, I think there is some merit with the indie scene now that I think we're seeing this explosion of indie talent coming out. Now that we have Kickstarter, Indiegogo. Just last week I did a show.
It's a whole different culture and economy,
and it's
man.
Awesome.
Like,
it's awesome.
It is awesome because you don't need to have ever read a Marvel DC comic. That's not your entry point like it was for us when we were kids. Now you could be reading Raina Telgemeier, right? Or some kind of YA book and decide, oh, I want to do comics because of them. And in the book market, the YA comic has exploded. It's bigger than the books you get at the comic shop, you know? It's kind of incredible. I do think that as the years go on, you can make a living just writing and drawing your own stuff as long as you have a certain amount of a fan base.
Yeah, you built that fan base too. Another thing that we didn't have, right? One thing that you gave me when we were in CradleCon is that you gave me the KeyHole book. And it just, when I saw it, I was just smiling in my face because it was the ash can that I remember. I was like,
yeah, right.
Oh man, I love ash cans. I love ash cans. We don't really have ash cans like we used to, but we have Instagram for that now. We have
Instagram, we have Webtoon, we have like digital comics, you know, we have the vertical scroll. But there is something for me and for you about being able to hold that like kind of like self-published indie feeling. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you know, there's not many of those were printed. You know, like a certain floppy of a Marvel DC comic, which I appreciate as well. But there is something kind of I don't know, not more honest or more authentic, but more heartfelt, maybe. You know,
I love the homemade ash cans too. The ones that you took a printer and you just did it. You put the staple yourself. You did the work all. That's like totally. Those are fun to see.
DIY, man. DIY.
Yeah, those. That's why I love going to Mocha. Mocha's one of my favorite shows to go to. I had a blast going this year. Can't wait to do next year. And next year I'll probably do a table next year. So it was just it's beautiful artwork, and there was so much good talent there, which was great. And one of the books I did read, which I love the art style. I love your choice of color. Was the Billy Dogma book that you gave me?
Oh,
Um,
Fear My Dear, the
Fear My
collection.
Dear. I didn't finish it. I read the first chapter,
Right,
right, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the other books because if I stay here, not gonna get to read the other books.
right,
But
right.
I love the color work. So talk to me a little bit about Billy Dogma and what kind of character this is.
Well, the Billy Dogma and Jane Legit are
Jane
the last.
Legit.
Basically, they're these love titans, and they're the last romantic anti-heroes in a way. And it's just my way of exploring the idea of romance and relationships, and loyalty, and what
Yeah.
that means. I originally did this as a web comic uh, in 2006 on the Live Journal blogging platform, under the banner of a comics collective called Activate that I
Mhm.
founded with about 6 or 7 other people, and we would all have one day of the week type thing. And I did it because when I got the Critter gig with Harvey Picard to draw his graphic novel, I knew I would disappear for about a year, and then the book would come out 15 months later, and maybe I get 1 or 2 weeks of some hype and play, and Harvey would get the bulk of the criticism, and it would just say illustrated by Dean Haspiel, and maybe one person might say something extra nice about my art, and that would be about it, because it probably wouldn't blow up like a Watchmen or a Dark Knight Returns, right? So it'd be like the little indie comic that could through DC, kind of thing. So I realized, well, what I can do is I can show up once a week with a 4 to 8 panel webcomic for free online. And I'd already created this Billy Dogma character. So I decided to tell his story, another story. And then I did that for about 2 years. And that got collected into Fear My Dear. And at the time, to also economize on the production, I decided to do a one color palette. Like, it was a black and white artwork with red slapped on top, right? On one story. And then the other story was like yellow and orange, right?
Mhm.
With like maybe a darker tone of red on the red one. And it was just me kind of just trying to like speed up the process, but also give it kind of like this red light district kind of feeling, kind of like this erotica, maybe a little tinge of erotica, color. And also, to be honest, I don't really know how to color well, but I think in terms of tone, as in shading with colors. So that's why I elected to use that kind of style. And also, it separated the other comics from that, because it was black and white, but it had this kind of red color, or the other one was like yellow and orange, right? And tonally, I was kind of shifting from this like red light district noir story, Immortal, to the actual other story, which is called Fear My Dear. And I'm such a fan of Sergio Leone and spaghetti westerns. I wanted to be kind of give this yellow desert kind of orange, hot sun feel, and that's why I chose those color schemas. And I do that today with current work. I just finished a project that's black and white with a little bit of blue, as a tone. So that's kind of like my default and where I feel most comfortable. And I try to create comics around basically my own limitations. Even though I try to challenge myself, I'm also working with my, virtues.
Yeah, and one thing I could say about your art style that I've noticed plenty of times is the simplicity, but yet the detail's still there, right? So it doesn't have to be overly simplified. It doesn't it you don't use a lot of cross hatching. You use a lot of negative space. I know you do that, but it's either a heavy brush stroke or it's just a solid black on top of whatever color, and the color actually brings in the shadows. The
Mm-hmm.
color brings in the work that will bring in the depth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very you say cartoonist, but it's very animated in style, right? When
Sure.
when I originally first saw your work years ago, I immediately compared it to that of Bruce Timm, right?
Oh, that's great.
I'm sure yeah, I'm not sure if you've gotten those comparisons
I've
before.
got a couple. I got a couple like that. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
again, I'm going to attribute that to CC Beck.
yeah,
Like,
CC Beck,
absolutely.
Alex Toth is another one.
Alex Toth, absolutely.
Yeah, Alice. Yeah, those guys, they bring this simplicity in their artwork that's all you need. Some people over exaggerate on the details, and that's okay.
Right.
But then there's those that just less is more for them.
And I would even add Will Eisner to
Eisner, of course,
to my stable, because there was a lot of theater in his work, and human behavior, the way he draws human behavior, and the way he anthropomorphizes landscape and city and props. They almost become the object also becomes a character. And sometimes I do that. And listen, cartooning is a shortcut art. There's a lot of shortcuts that you develop so you can just move that story, right? So you're turning those pages, you're cascading across those panels. Again, I don't want you to stop and ogle how well I drew something. I want you to keep moving, and just you set the pace as a reader, and you want to keep them going, keep them moving.
Yeah. So you mentioned the city as a story. The one character that I think you're most known for these days has been the Red Hook, right?
Hook.
The Red Hook, of course, right? Brooklyn.
I'm in Red Hook right now.
I like going to Red Hook. I like going to Brooklyn. I like going to Park Slope every so. My wife wishes we lived in Brooklyn, but I'm like, I'm a Bronxite.
It's too expensive here. It's gotten too expensive in Brooklyn, man.
It's getting like that over here too, bro. It's definitely
bet.
getting like that. The cost of living is crazy. People are moving out to find cheaper places, unfortunately, because you're not getting better. Unfortunately, it's just I'm suffering, and I'm sure you're suffering too in your neighborhood. I'm suffering from not having a parking spot, to the point that I'll leave my car there for a whole week just so I can keep that spot.
Absolutely. That's how I use my car, and I didn't have a car for many years until my mom, who lives in Florida, hooked me up with a friend that was selling one for cheap. And I was like, well, I have a driver's license. I might as well try to use a car. But most of the time, I'm just parking it.
Yeah,
sitting
across
in
the
that
street,
spot
across the street for 2 hours, right? Yeah, I'll tell my boss sometimes, I'm like, you mind if I stay here? It's like, street cleaning. And he'll look at me like he doesn't have a car, so he's like, trust me, street cleaning. They'll get you when you least expect it.
It's awful. I've seen one of those meter cops, like they've already cleaned the street. You moved over. It's going to be 1 o'clock soon or whatever. And you decide, 5 minutes before 1, I'm done. I'm good. It's done. And they still will ticket people.
And the one thing is that the majority of the city works a 9 to 5. So why is street clean 8:30 to 10, 10:30 to 1?
Yeah.
What's up with that?
I know.
What I mean?
I know.
There's a little game going on. So besides talking about parking, because I'm sure our fans that are watching this video cares about that. Talk to me a little bit about Red Hook and really the character of Brooklyn in your story that you ended up doing.
So in a nutshell, the Red Hook is about a super thief that's forced to become a superhero against his will, or he will die, when he's basically bequeathed the omnifist of altruism from a demigod called the Green Point. Right? There's a lot of characters in the Red Hook that are based on named after neighborhoods in Brooklyn. During a time where Brooklyn herself reveals to be sentient and is heartbroken by the toxicity of the world, and decides to secede physically and literally from Manhattan, ergo America, to start her own republic, where art can be bartered for food and services. It's all like a dreamscape in a lot of ways, and during a pandemic of a rise of a whole bunch of heroes and villains that emerge in what's now called New Brooklyn. And I did 4.5 seasons of the Red Hook on the Webtoon platform. So you can read it all for free, or you can buy them as comic book volumes 1 and 2 from Image Comics. And I'm still trying to figure out, am I going to publish an omnibus or not of this whole entire New Brooklyn tale. And it goes full circle. There is a whole story where basically the lead character is the Red Hook, dealing with the trials and tribulations of being kind of a bad guy that's forced to become a good guy, but then owns being a good guy, and there's a whole love story. There's a whole story with his mom, who's basically kind of a version of the Punisher, called the Coney. And there's a lot of characters in here, but yeah, Brooklyn herself becomes a character, and they're trying to heal her. or she's trying to heal herself through this experiment of this republic.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's and that's one thing I love about local talent. We'll call for this one, right? Because we're local here in New York. When you decide to do a story about your city and you bring your city into the story, I think with Stan Lee, what he did with New York, right? Because he lives in New York, he made it New York. It has a little more. It has a little more heart because you could. First of all, the places. I'm not from Brooklyn. I'm from the Bronx, and when we start talking about the Bronx. They like talking about hip hop here. I've never been much of a hip hop guy. I'm the weird kid that liked rock, while everybody else was liking hip hop. Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx, and I like hip hop. I didn't dance to salsa or anything like that, but it was a requirement, so I had to. But when we talk about like our towns, Mount Haven, Bedford. And with you guys, you got Bed-Stuy, you got Red Hook, you got Coney, Coney Island.
Oh, we got Carroll Gardens, Borum Hill, Cobble Hill. I got Cobble Hill Colossus,
Yeah, and
I got
Queens has too.
Head. I've got the Flat Bush,
That's a good one, the Flat Bush.
I mean, it starts to recommend itself after a while,
Yeah, it starts writing itself and stuff like that. So when I was reading it, I loved it. I did like the boxing scene. Of course, with the Bronx Bomber.
The Bronx Bomber, that's right.
But talking about the little Easter eggs, and I had to ask because it stood out like a sore thumb to me. When I saw the boxing glove image, right? I love how you made it look like a female character. I don't know if you...
I want to see this image. You can't right?
Can I find it? I'm trying to remember where I found where I read it, but it was in the webcomics, right? So it's in the Webtoons. So he was fighting the Bronx Bomber, and this image of the boxing glove, and it's like this. When you first see it, you don't recognize it being a boxing glove. It actually looks like a corset.
Oh, you mean where it's tied?
Yeah, it looks like a corset.
That's all you, Izzy. That's all you, man.
Oh, that's all me. I just have a sick mind. That's what you're trying to say?
That's sick. Great imagination. I love it.
When I show it to you, I got the Webtoons here. Let me see if it's one of the early issues.
Funny, man.
When you see it, you get like, oh yeah, there it is.
Did you notice that the coach was named Jack?
Yeah, I knew. I caught that. I caught that a mile away.
Yeah.
He looked very familiar too.
That's right.
These are the things that you seem to catch. While I'm searching for it here, I'm looking over here. I'm in the issues here. When I'm searching through it, I was just seeing. I love the fact that it was like full panel pages.
Yep.
So with
those are splash pages. Like
they're all
Webtoon is actually a splash page.
It's just a splash because when I was reading it, I was literally reading it like this. That's how I was reading it on my tablet. I was just scrolling upwards.
Right. That's how you have to do it. That's right.
It
so it changes the way I show a story because obviously in print you're thinking left to right and down, right? And back over. And then every 2 pages you turn that hopefully for a cliffhanger moment or something. And it just changed when you have to do a vertical scroll because you're just going down, 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 right? And so the reveals are at the bottom of the page almost.
Yeah, it was very different on how I was reading it because I don't really read as many Webtoons comics.
Right.
I'm an old school comic, old school comics. That's how I read. So
me too, to be
I
honest.
love opening my page. I love going to my next page. I love,
right.
I love the cliffhanger. I'm a big fan of the cliffhanger.
Me too. And those are hard to do because in Webtoon, I had to produce 25 cliffhangers for a 26 chapter story. And they weren't all like bangers, but
but that's old school serial. That's old school serial.
Really,
back
it truly
in the day.
is. Every 5 pages, I had to turn that into like a little moment,
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to figure. Oh, here it is. I found it. When you see it, you know exactly what it is.
All right.
You're gonna be like,
I gotta get my studio mate over here, Whitney. I want you to look at this.
Let's see here. Tell me that doesn't look like a corset.
Oh, is that boobs? You're looking at boobs and stuff? That's hilarious, man.
You never saw that?
I didn't see
does.
that.
I mean, it does.
And it's the way you have it set up too. So
right, because I'm introducing you to the scene through this moment, right? And then it starts with a close up, and we pull back, probably, right?
And the funny thing is, when I first read it, when I was first reading it this morning, I did not realize it was a boxing glove.
That's hilarious, man. Well, that's what you were thinking this morning, Izzy.
And you know, it's the start of chapter 8, right? Again, I'm not even noticing that it says first 2 rounds, do a dance, right? But then again, that could be subjective as well.
I love it.
Right?
See how great a cartoonist I am? You got 2 images for the price of 1.
But this is one of those things where you just go ahead and you don't even think about it, and you're just like, you're doing something without even realizing it. So that's what I immediately thought. I said, oh, this is a corset. And then I see the Jack character, which I immediately caught that. And I think this might have been one of the first times I saw it, but it was like, hey, look at him with his little mustache, his Tony Stark mustache.
There you go. That's right.
But then it's the zoom out and to show that it's actually a boxing glove. And even here, it still resembles that. I'm sorry, it still resembles it.
Now that I can't unsee it now. Thank you.
So I caught a lot of that stuff here when I was looking at your book, and that's
great.
That's one of those things I love. This particular character, the Bronx Bomber, what did you model him after? Because I was thinking Mike Tyson in my head.
You know, that's good enough. Mike Tyson, I'm trying to remember, just someone who looks like he should be able to kick Sam Broja's ass, the Red Hook. And then I think Sam accidentally kills him, and it messes up his career, So, but yeah, no, I see that.
That's awesome. I love this artwork.
Thank you. Oh yeah, and then we go into what happened here, and so he gets exonerated because it was an accidental.
It was a box. Yeah, it was a boxing match.
I mean, but he should have had his ass handed to him, and somehow he won, even though he got beat up. But then he lost his career basically, and was just mopping up blood in the coach's gym. So,
I love this image right here. It's very
thanks, man.
Very Frank Miller Sin City.
Absolutely. Steal from the best, right?
Maybe, you got to do it. You might as well, right?
Yeah, man.
All that fun. And then he can't get a job. He can't get a job. I love it.
I mean, I had to set up basically in one chapter why he actually kind of became a loser, literally, and then goes to a life of crime.
Yeah. So I'm definitely enjoying it. I got through 10 issues.
Keep going, man.
Within a train ride. So
awesome.
Very simple read, but good storytelling.
Thank you.
Absolutely, it was great reading it.
Thank you.
Let's go. You know what? You mentioned something that and we're going past what I normally wanted, but I'm having a blast talking. If you don't mind, for a few more minutes.
Yeah, I got about 5 more.
Okay, perfect. You did manage to get to the big 2, right? You got some books in there.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a ton. I've done a bunch of little things. I mean, yeah, I did the Thing miniseries with Evan Dorkin, colored by Matt Madden. I think I got Matt the gig, and he's an indie cartoonist. And that was a lot of fun. I felt a lot of pressure because that was basically my first real, I quit. I quit a gig that was paying my rent, just a part-time gig, to decide, you know what? I'm going to go full-time, full blast into comics. And, I don't think I was ready for prime time. I still don't think I'm ready for prime time. But I managed to kind of get around, and maybe because I was being touted as an indie guy, right? Don't look at me for your regular cool comics. Look at me as an alternative cartoonist, right? And I'm cool with that. But then you're learning deadline pressures and in collaboration. And then eventually, I think in the 3rd issue, Wayne Von Grawbadger started inking the book, and it kind of changed it tonally what I was doing. And that's fine. That's what happens when we start to collaborate, Yeah. But I was it was going to be hard to hit these last couple of issue deadlines. And, I did that. I did Spider-Man's Tangled Web. I did a bunch of little short stories. I did a Wood God story for Strange Tales, And again, I did a bunch of little things at Marvel. And then I did a bunch of stuff at DC, including this is coming out, I think, in a month or so. They're doing a Perry White special that has a Perry White Wildcat story that I drew that Neil Clyde wrote. That's really cool. It's really a really good story. I'm proud of it. And I'm really excited that they're putting together this 48-page one-shot. I don't know why. Why is Perry White suddenly getting a one-shot? Apparently this was fast-tracked. I don't know if something's going on in the comics and the Superman comics right now where that warrants this. But hell, I love it. So, and I look forward to reading the other stories in there.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. And then right now, you got this one just came out.
Fox. So I did a 12-page, a new 12-page story of the Fox that I wrote and did the line art for. And it was a lot of fun to revisit this character after 5 years. I hadn't worked on him in a bunch of years. And I had to think about, like, well, where's the Fox today? What's going on with him and his family? And also, knowing it would probably be the lead story, I was thinking, well, like, for people who've never read the Fox, how would this work? Like, how could I kind of reintroduce this character to a new crop of readers, So that's what I thought about when I wrote and drew this story. Mm-hmm. And Vito Del Santi wrote a really great story. That's the second story. And then we have a Alex Toth reprint. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I'm going to get to that book this week too. I was reading the other ones.
Yeah, yep.
But it's been great, man. This has been fun. One last thing I want to share, because it's something that you have, and that's we talked about Whitney, right? Nightwork Studio.
Come over here.
Talk to me a little bit about Nightwork Studio. We ended off with that.
I'm gonna make Whitney.
What? Oh.
Hair's in the wind.
Oh, my hair's in the wind.
Here, switch seats with me.
No.
Get in the hot seat.
I didn't.
Let's talk about Whitney for a second.
No.
Hey, Whitney.
Hi.
Here, switch it back to her lovely face.
I should have. Oh my gosh, no! I didn't prepare for this.
So what's night?
Oh God, I look like I feel. Wait, what?
This looks like one of our old videos. Remember?
Yeah.
I know.
If you go to YouTube, we have a Nightwork channel.
Oh yeah. So what is Nightwork Studios about? What is it about?
Well, it's how do we say it on the website? Something like it's a website for our multimedia collaborations.
Yeah, it's like an umbrella, because Dean and I work together sometimes, and we've done like special events, but we've also written together and made some things. So I think it's just a term that refers to anything that we make together, whether it be short films or editing a comics anthology, which we've done, or making a video or doing an event together, including
films, plays.
Yeah.
You wrote a play that then got turned into a short film recently. That's going to festivals right now.
Yes.
And we did do an anthology called Pandemics that was nominated for a Ringo.
Yes.
A Ringo Award.
Nominated for a Ringo.
Yeah.
Last year.
Congratulations.
That we made during the eyes of the pandemic, Yeah. And we're just finishing up a screenplay right now, a feature-length screenplay. Again, it's doing the work, right? Mm-hmm. Like so that we have it. We're armed with this stuff. We can't help but be creative. And sitting across from each other, I get so much energy and inspiration from Whitney.
Oh, thank you.
And you're supposed to say the same.
I was waiting for that answer too. But my wife would say something similar too. I'll say everything like that. My wife's like, "Thank you," and then she'll look at me like, "You better give me credit."
Yeah, Whitney's my work, But also we call it night work because we're often here at night working.
Yes, like right now, which is why I look like a crazy person. But yes, we're often here. If this
is a look of a crazy person, you look fantastic. I'm not just saying that.
You just want to be crazy, Izzy.
Hey, if I didn't get this haircut, my hair would be a mess right now. You know what I mean? So, there's not much left anyway. Look at that.
So what are you working on these days?
Oh gosh, well, I'm actually sitting across the room. I do like a daily diary comic, and then I post it on Patreon. I post some of it on Instagram. So I do that, but then, like Dean said, did you talk about how we're going to make several short films together? Oh, well, thank you. I'm also going and working on short films. And And then I don't know, what am I? It's late.
Kids.
Oh, I write children's books. A lot of them you can read on Epic, which is available for free through public schools and libraries. And I don't know, many other things that I'm even too tired to remember right now. But those are the big ones.
Awesome. That's great, guys. Well, it's been a blast having both of you on the show. It's been great.
So yeah.
Thank you, Whitney, for stopping by.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Whitney.
And Dean, let everybody know where we can find you.
You can find me at deanhaspiel.com, which basically goes to my old live journal. So it's not a website proper, but I do update it often.
I know I got a cameo in it. I saw that.
Oh yeah, that's right.
You got a little cameo in there.
Instagram, I'm Dean Haspiel _art. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I think I like Instagram the best. I mean, I like Facebook is grandfathered in because it's the one I've had the longest and where I can feel like I can kind of have a little conversation. Yeah. Instagram is more image based, as you know. And I just transitioned my MailChimp newsletter over to Substack. So find me on Substack and subscribe. And about once a month right now, I'll fill you in on what's going on and with my work and my life. And then eventually I think I'm going to do a project-based thing on Substack as well. So we'll see.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Dean, hang on for a second. I'm just going to put you in the waiting room for a second so we could end off the broadcast. So don't go anywhere. All right, guys. That was our show for today. It was great talking to Dean Haspiel. Again, check out his work. It's all over the place. It's good stuff. Go to Webtoons, read the Red Hook and the Fox, which is out right now with Archie Comics. I'll see you next time where we're going to be doing the Star Wars preview of Obi-Wan. So I'll see you then. Take care, guys. Bye.